All right, today we're going to look at the second installment of our Enumerables class. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with a bit of review. We're going to talk a little bit about .each, .map, and .find and find all. And so what I'm going to do is in your Code Help Slack channel, I'm going to drop a link to a spreadsheet that you will have view-only access. You can go to File, make a copy, make your own copy and fill it out. I encourage everybody to do that. And what we're going to do is we're going to answer 3 questions for some enumerables. And these questions are, can we pass a block of code to this enumerable? The second question is, do we usually pass a block of code to this enumerable? And the third question is the last line of code in that block a Boolean expression? Okay, so those are going to be the 3 questions to answer. So I'm going to drop that in your Slack channel right now. And you should be able to access that spreadsheet. Pretty sure I gave everybody access. I usually forget. There we go. I see people in there. Yay. I didn't forget. So we're going to start by reviewing .each, .map, .find, and find all. I'm going to put you in some breakout rooms where you can just discuss that. But I encourage everybody, go to File, make a copy, and make a copy of that spreadsheet for yourself to fill out. And then we're going to take about 15 minutes or so for you to kind of talk about this amongst your group. So .each, .map, .find, and find all, only these first 4 columns that I've highlighted here. So each, map, find all, just for review. And then when we come back, we'll answer any just last lingering questions. And then we're going to go talk about max by, min by, and sort by. We're going to go through 5 more today. Well, actually, you're going to help go through 5 more today. And then we're going to come back as a group and we're going to learn about those. So let me get some breakout rooms going for the first batch here. And we'll do 12 breakout rooms. And I'm going to give you just 10 minutes in this breakout room, and we'll give you a 30-second warning to come back after that. All right, so here come your rooms. So just make a copy of that spreadsheet for yourself and then answer those 3 questions for each, map, find, and find all. And we'll see you back in 10 minutes. There we go. All right. Cool. Let's chat about what y'all came up with. So I'm going to call on some random rooms. Let's see, what did I make? 12 breakout rooms, I think. Where are my breakout rooms? So many windows. There we go. 12. So I'm gonna go grab a nerd dice. I got a 12-sided dice here someplace. There we go. 12-sided dice. We're gonna go with room number 7. Room number 7 was Antonio, Elliot, and Ted. Let's go with .each. So what did y'all come up with? Can we pass a block of code to .each?
We can.
We can, yes. And do we usually pass a block of code to this enumerable?
Yes.
Yep. Doesn't really make sense to not do it. Otherwise, you're just like iterating over something and doesn't really make a ton of sense to. Does the last line of code in there have to be a Boolean? Is it typically a Boolean?
No.
Right. Yeah, it's not typically a Boolean for that one. Awesome. Cool. Thank you. Let's go to room number 9. Room number 9 was Dane and Sammy. Let's go over .map. Do we typically pass a block of code, or can we pass a block of code to .map? And do we usually pass a block of code?
We said yes to both.
Yep, yes to both. That's right. And is the last line of code typically a Boolean expression?
So we said yes at first, but now looking at the answer for .each, we're going to go with no.
All right. Yeah, it's not, it doesn't, I mean, it can be a Boolean if you just want an array of true false values based on something that you're doing as a comparison. But typically, no, it's not typically a Boolean at the end of .map. Okay, cool. Let's switch over to find. Let's go over to room number 11. That's going to be Blake and Soez. Dot find. Can we pass a block of code to dot find?
We had yes for this one.
Okay. Do we usually pass a block of code to dot find?
We also had yes to this one.
Yep. And then is this one typically a Boolean?
And we also had yes to this one.
That's right. Yeah. So for dot find, we use that Boolean expression to know whether we're collecting what we're or stopping when we find something that matches. Yeah. All right. Great. Thank you. And let's go to room number 5. Room number 5 is going to be Brett, Brian, and Caroline. Sorry. Find all. What do we have for our answers for find all?
We had yes.
All right. And then do we usually pass a block of code here?
Yes.
Also yes. And is the last line here typically a Boolean?
Yes.
Also yes. Cool. All right. Great work. All right. Any questions on those 4? Let's open it up for just general questions, comments, funny jokes. Any questions about these 4 that we'll go through review? If you do have a favorite joke, by all means, drop it in chat. I love a good pun, love a good joke, especially on a Monday morning. Got a raised hand. Let's go to Dane. What do you got for us, Dane?
Hey, sorry, my internet's really great.
Okay.
As find all, or is that the same thing as select all? I forget.
Oh, that's a good question. So some enumerables in Ruby
it-
have the same names. So for example, we have find all, and map. And sometimes we get a little confused, because we can also have select, collect, detect. But which of these are which? The last time I taught this class in Mod1, I actually called the class "What the ect is going on?" because these all end in ECT. Because there's select, collect, detect. There are a whole bunch of other ones that end in ECT. But which are which? Let's open that up for discussion. So we have select, collect, detect. Which one of these map to find all, and map? Let's go to Karina or Trina.
Find is detect, find all is select, and I'm assuming then map is select or collect.
All right. Does everybody agree? Give me a thumbs up in Zoom if you agree with that. Handful of thumbs ups. Yep. All right, cool. So Dane, does that answer your question for you so far?
Yes. Yeah, so find is detect, find all is select, and map is collect.
Yeah. Now it's a little confusing. Like, why do we have multiple names that do the same thing? Similar to what we talked about when we were talking about like an array. We can do .length, .size, .count. Like these are all the same things. I mean, they all kind of do the same thing, but they're all different names. Why do we have different names for stuff? I don't have a good answer. I really don't have a good answer. My suspicion is that having studied a lot of programming languages over the years, some programmers get really sort of clingy about the kinds of methods that they like. And so it could have been that whoever first invented Ruby came up with, let's call it find, or let's call it detect. And, some other programmer from some other language came in and said, well, in this other language, we call it find. So let's just make find an alias for detect. Let me spell that properly here. And so, yeah, sometimes in programming languages, things just end up as aliases because some things are going to be more familiar to other programmers, which can make it a little bit easier to sort of get into that language when you're first learning. But it can be confusing as well as a newcomer because you're like, which of these am I supposed to use? Do I use find or do I use detect? Do I use find all or do I use select? You can use either one. There's no right answer on that one. Cool. Good question on that though, Dane. Thanks for asking. As always, if you've got questions that you don't want to ask on the video, you're welcome to DM me on Zoom, and I'm happy to ask the question on your behalf and answer it as well. Cool. Any other questions about these first four? Each, map, find all. Anything else you want to go over, discuss? Let's go to Sammy. What do you got for us?
For find and find all, is the last line of code always going to be a Boolean expression, or it can be a Boolean expression?
Ooh, that's a good question. What do people think? Does it have to be a Boolean? Should it be a Boolean? What do you think? You can drop in chat. You can unmute and share. What do y'all think? Does it have to be a Boolean? So one person saying it has to be. So in this case, it has to be. If we look at the Ruby documentation, let me grab this and put it over here in my shared screen. If we look at the documentation for find, it says it passes each entry, returns the first for which block is not false. And so in this case, this one has to be a Boolean expression, yes. And if we go look at find all, it says the same thing. So it's returning all of the elements where the given block of code returns a true value. So in this case, it does have to be a Boolean expression.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for asking, Sammy. It's good to get clarification on this. Sometimes the last line of code does not have to be a Boolean, but for some of these, it will have to be a Boolean expression. For example, .sum is an enumerable. Technically, we could pass a block of code to .sum. If I had an array of all the numbers from 1 to 5, oops, I could do like array.sum, and this will give us a value of 15. It's going to add up all those values. But I could also do something like array.sum do, and we'll do a num. Oops. And inside of this block of code, I could do something like num.odd. And then end that block of code. I know my syntax looks a little weird because it's centered, but we could do a Boolean expression in here to say, I only want to add up the things that are odd numbers. In this case, this would result in a value of 9 because it's going to add 1 plus 3 plus 5 because those are the only things that evaluate to being odd. And so sum can take a block of code. It could not take a block of code. If we do pass a block of code, again, the expression inside of here will typically end in a Boolean expression. So some enumerables have to be Boolean. Some of them don't have to be. It really depends on what we're trying to do in that block of code. All right, let's do a quick palm break. We'll come back in 5, and then we're gonna I'm gonna put you back into breakout rooms. So don't leave yet. Don't leave yet. Not done. We're gonna take a palm break in a moment. What we're gonna do when we come back from the palm break, I'm gonna put you in new breakout rooms where you're going to go learn about some of these yourself. And then we're gonna come back as a class, and I'm gonna have you explain to the rest of the class what these things are. So what we're going to do is we're going to do probably a couple of different breakout rooms. I'm going to like rotate them around. And what we're going to do in those breakout rooms is we're just going to do like .max and .max by. So I'm going to have 2 different groups of breakout rooms. And one group is going to do max. The other one's going to do max by. And then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about that. And then we'll do min and we'll do min by, and we'll come back and we'll talk about that. And then we'll do sort by at the end. Sound good? All right, we'll see you back in 5 minutes. We'll come back at 33 minutes after the hour. All right, so everybody came back from break, and what I did is I put them into some new breakout rooms that were odd number or even numbered, and the odd number rooms are going to go look up the Ruby documentation for .max, and the even numbered Zoom rooms are going to go look up the documentation for max by. And I've given them 6 minutes to go review, do a little sample code, and answer the same 3 questions that we answered before. Can we pass a block of code? Do we usually pass a block of code? And is the last line of code in that block typically a Boolean expression? So we'll see what they come back with. And we're going to have each of the groups kind of teach the other about it. I'm going to have them share their screen, and we will, have some sample code and so on. I'm going to pause the recording here, and I'll resume when we come back. Right, so the breakout rooms are ending. We're going to get everybody to come back in just a few seconds, and we'll have them teach us about max and max by. All right, welcome back, everybody. Cool. Well, let's call in some random rooms here, and let's see what we got. So we're going to start with room number 8. So it's an even numbered room. So we're going to learn about max by. So room number 8 was JJ and Ted.
Yeah.
We put yes for the first one, that we can pass it into a block of code, but
Okay.
We were kind of on the fence about the second one because I think we found it both ways.
So max by can work without a block of code?
But we didn't have time to finish looking, but that's where we were at.
All right.
Before.
All right. And then based on what you saw, should the last line of code be a Boolean?
We put no.
No.
Okay. Cool. Do you have a sample of code that you could show? If not, that's okay. We'll find another room.
You don't have a sample code.
No, we were just looking on the lesson.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Let's go to room number 7. Room number 7 is Jason and then Marla. So tell us a little bit about .max. What did you all come up with for .max for those 3 questions?
Yeah, so we said that you can pass a block of code to it, but that it's not normally done.
Okay.
And then we also said no to the last line of code being a Boolean expression.
Okay. So what would that last line of code be for .max?
Like length or something, like a number or something to judge it by.
Yeah, some sort of numeric representation. So where we talked about like find all have to have a Boolean to say like, yes, these are things that we want to like collect or sort of pull out of that array. When we do .max, we're just looking, if we do pass a block of code, then what we're doing is we're using that expression to determine how we want to find the maximum within that array. So if we wanted to find, like if we had an array of all the student names and we want to find the student with the longest name, we could do name.length or something inside that block of code. And now we're not necessarily looking at some other representation in there. We're doing some other expression to give us a new numeric value that Ruby is going to interpret in order to figure out, is this the maximum one or not? So it doesn't have to be a Boolean. Yeah, you're right. Cool. Let's go to a couple other rooms. Just did room 7. Room number 6 is Ozzy and Scott. So that's going to take us back to max by. Ozzy and Scott, we're missing one of the things on our chart here. Do we usually pass a block of code to max by?
Yes, we do.
Yeah. Yeah, this one does. This one, if you go look at the Ruby documentation, it actually says it returns an object that gives the maximum value from the given block. So this one requires a block of code. Yeah, cool. Do you happen to have a sample of code that you did a little test with?
Yeah.
Yeah, you want to share your screen and show us?
Just wrote it out in the. Let me share my screen. So after a weekend thinking about beers, so just down here did beers and then had an array of different breweries, and then do beers.max by and pass by the object beer. And so for each element of the array, it's checking the length of the name. And then in this case, I didn't test it, but I think it would return new terrain because that has the longest length of letters in it.
Of the name. Yep. Good.
Yeah.
Cool. Someone asked in chat if I was sharing my screen. No, I have the same spreadsheet up. But I'm hoping that everyone else is going to be filling in their spreadsheet as we're going through and answering these things. Cool. All right. Well, looks like Scott also kind of went ahead and did a bunch of the other ones there. So spoiler alert on some of those. Cool. It's totally okay. Any questions on max or max by? Let's talk about that before we move on from here. So max can take a block of code. Let's go to Lex. What do you have for us, Lex?
My partner and I were struggling with the exact difference between max and max by, or min and min by, because it seems that min can do the things that min by does, but it's just not conventional. Is that right?
Oh, that's a good question. So are they kind of the same? That's a really good question. So if we go look at the documentation between max and max by, let me share my screen again. As soon as I find the right window. So many Zoom windows. There we are. Share screen. Share this one. This one I'll share. Cool. So if we go over to here and we go look at the documentation for max and max by. So max doesn't have to take a block of code, but it can take a block of code. If it takes a block of code, then we tell it how we want to compare things in order to find the biggest thing. So in this case, we're looking at the length, and it's using this sort of greater than, equal to, less than operator. And then it's basically going to give us things in that order. So it's going to return the two things in this case that are the longest. So if we had horse, albatross, and dog in our array, then we're saying go find the two things based on this criteria. If we do a max by, it's a little bit different. Well, not a lot different. I mean, it's kind of the same thing, but instead of building out the whole comparator in here, we just have a single expression. So if we look at max, this is taking what we call a comparator in here, because it's looking at it kind of A/B values, and it's comparing all of the other values as A/B kind of thing. Like I want to compare this length to that length, where in max by, it's a much simpler expression. It's just x.length. And so you don't have to worry so much about the comparator. So it's a little bit less code in that scenario. Someone was asking in chat, what's the %W? This is just a different way of writing an array. The %W is a carryover from the Perl programming language, which influenced part of how Ruby was made as a language. So Ruby was influenced by C, Smalltalk, and Perl. And the %W, I believe, comes from Perl. I know it doesn't come from C, but I don't know about Smalltalk. But %W is just a way of saying I want to make an array where everything is separated by white space. And so as long as you have single word strings and you're separating them by a white space character, the %W with the parentheses is just a different way of building that array. So the question was specifically around like min and min by. So if we go look at min and min by. So we have the same kind of thing. So min, again, takes that comparator, and min by just simplifies that comparator a little bit. And so min by is kind of doing the same thing. If we do pass a block of code to min, let me back up. I would say if you want to pass a block of code to min, I would just use min by, and just use min to say like, just go get, you know, in this case, the smallest thing. Now, when we look at the smallest thing of a list of strings, it's actually comparing the values in here. And so it's returning albatross because that begins with the letter A, and A is less than D, and D is less than horse, or H from horse. And so when we look at the min value, it's actually comparing the values of what's in here, where the block of code is going to be an expression about the sort of the values. as well. So in chat, someone said, so functionally they could be used to do the same thing, but min max requires a more wordy approach to achieve what max by and min by does. So yeah, I think to summarize, if you do feel the need to pass an expression to min or max, you should use min by or max by, because those expressions will generally be a little bit simpler to understand. Someone else asked in chat, is that value considered the ordinal value? That's a good question. What does ordinal mean? Ordinal. So ordinal, short for ordinal number. That helps. Thanks, Google. Relating to a thing in a series. So yes. So the ordinal value. So the ordinal value is like the value of the next thing in the series. Oh, shut up, Google. My phone activated because I said the G word. So yeah. So when we talk about ordinal values, we're talking about the actual value of what's in the array. So in this case, it's looking at the ordinal value of the string itself. And so min and max by default are going to look at the value in here, and if they're strings, it's going to compare the actual characters in the string to figure out alphabetically which one is sort of first or last for the min and max. All right, so let's go back to here. So we did the max, and we know that max by, we usually pass a block of code here. Neither of them have to be a Boolean expression, but we don't typically pass a block of code to max. And we just saw from the documentation that min and min by were exactly the same thing, or treated the same way. I mean, they're obviously doing the opposite, but they're effectively doing the same thing. Cool, let's pause here for other questions on min and max, or min by and max by. Let's go to Carolyn.
So for the documentation for max, when it says a.max returns horse, and you're talking about the ordinal value, the thing that because horse starts with an H and
Yep. So alphabetically, when we call just a.max, it gave us the value of horse because it's looking at the ordinal value of the strings, and it's basically looking at the alphabetical values and goes, well, A is less than D, D is less than H, therefore H is my maximum value. If we had multiple words in here that started with H, then it would look at the second character. Like if I had hay and horse, horse would still be the max, hay would be the min because HA comes before HO. And so it would actually go character by character through the string, trying to find which one was the minimum or maximum in that case.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for asking. Cool. Any other questions about min max or min by and max by? No other questions. All right, well, let's take another palm break. Let's come back in 5 minutes, and then we'll go through sort by, and then we'll finish up a little early. Cool, so we'll see you back. We'll just come back right at the top of the hour. So we'll see you back in 6 minutes. And here we go. Cool. So we're going to look at .sort and sort by. I tricked you there. I originally said it was just going to be sort by. But before we do that, Sway's had a question. So let's go to Sway's. What do you got for us?
Yeah, sorry about that. I just had a question about the min.
Yeah.
So I was just playing around, especially with the strings. Like I made 3 strings like panda, bear, and gorilla.
Okay.
And so when I did the dot min, based on the theory behind it, like it should output bear, right? When you do the dot min. Yeah. So I guess my question is that like, let's say if you accidentally like capitalize one of the strings and you do dot min, it prints out the capped word for me as I was playing with it. And so I was just wondering like why that is. Like I know that it's supposed to be bear. So I have like panda, lowercase, bear, lowercase, and then gorilla upcase. Yep. And when I did dot min, instead of printing out the bear, it printed out gorilla.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So why is gorilla considered less than bear if these things are happening alphabetically? So let me go back and share my screen over here. What we're going to do is we're going to go to a website called ASCIIchart.com. And this is where we're going to learn just really briefly kind of how everything has a value. And what we see here is the lowercase b in bear actually has a value of 98. And this has to do with the binary representation of how these things are actually represented in memory to the computer. So if we turn the number 98 into binary of ones and zeros, that's how the computer will recognize a byte value of the letter B. And what we see is capital G has a lower value. So capital G is a value of 71, where the lowercase b is a value of 98. And so these are the values that it's actually using to compare those strings. It says, oh, capital G comes before lowercase b when we look at this whole chart of characters. And that's how it's giving you gorilla with a capital G instead of bear with a lowercase b.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Great question. That can be a little confusing. But yeah, it all comes down to what we call the actual ASCII value. And ASCII stands for something. I forget what. It's been a long time since I studied what ASCII actually stands for. Cool. Before the break, I said when we came back, we were going to talk about sort by, but we could also just look at .sort as well. So let's take a quick peek at what these are doing. Again, if we kind of come back here and look at the documentation. So this Ruby page, actually, let me just drop this in your Zoom chat for you. Thank you for putting ASCII in there, the American Standard Code for Information Interchange. So if we come to the documentation, this will be the documentation for the sort by page. I just dropped in your Zoom chat. But if we go look at sort, this, by the way, is showing you all the different kinds of enumerables that are available in Ruby. But if we go look at the documentation for sort, then we can kind of see what we need to do for filling out this chart a little bit. Can we pass a block of code to sort? We can, but we can also choose not to. .sort by itself is just going to return a new array. Actually, does it return or does it change? That's a good question. Comparisons, it returns an array containing the items that are sorted. So it doesn't change the original array. So if I had an array of all random student names and I did .sort, the original array does not change, but it will return a value of sorted values. And that's kind of an important distinction to make here. So let me go back and share my screen. I can share this screen. So if I had an array here of students and I had, I'll just do our instructor names. So we had Ian and Mike and Megan. Oops. If this was our array, and then I did students.sort, it would actually return the sorted array. So it would return Megan, then Mike, and then, or sorry, it would return Ian and then Megan and then Mike. But it returns that value. If we were to print out the value of students afterwards, students would still be the original array. And so if you want to sort an array, you would generally put it into a new array called like sorted array or something like that. And then that's going to hold the sorted array where your original array does not change. Now you could put a bang operator on there and that will sort it and destroy the original data. If you really want to, you can put a bang on there to do that in place. So based on what we see in the documentation, we can pass code to that enumerable. Do we have to? Do we usually? Not usually. Again, because there's a sort by. So we don't usually pass a block of code here. And it's also not a Boolean expression. And then just like the min by and max by, these are going to operate the same way. So if we look at the documentation for sort by, then we can see, let me pull that back up over here. We pull up sort by. then it's based on a given block. So this one has to be given a block of code. So that's why both of these are yes. And the last line is typically not a Boolean expression. It's just how you want to sort them. Like, how do you want to sort the data? So for example, if we had an object where we had students and one of the attributes was a student age, then we could do sort by student.age. And it would sort everybody by their age. If I said sort by student.name, it would sort them by their name. And so it's not typically going to be a Boolean expression here. Any questions on sort or sort by? There's some practice examples and things like that that you can do in the enumerables exercise or the enums exercise, as well as in the lesson plan as well for sort and sort by. All right, without looking at the documentation, let's take some volunteers on these last ones. So we're going to look at .all, .one, and .none. Don't look at the documentation. I want your guesses on what do you think .all does, and do you think it can take a block of code and so on? Any volunteers? Let's start with .all. Taylor, thanks for volunteering. What do you think here? What do you think .all is going to do, just by its name?
I think .all is going to iterate, and it's going to evaluate based on a Boolean expression to make sure that every element in an array meets some condition.
Yeah, okay. So that kind of leads us to think that, yeah, we're going to need some kind of Boolean expression in order to find that out. And does it sound like we're going to pass a block of code in order to do that?
Yes.
So I'm going to say yes here. Do you think we have to pass a block of code?
This one is a brain bender to me. I feel like there's always a way around something, but I'm going to go with yes, we would usually pass a block here.
We would usually pass a block of code. We don't have to pass a block of code to this one, but it's like the results don't make sense to me if I don't pass a block of code. Like if you just have an array and say .all, like what's it even going to do? Like, yeah. All right, thanks, Taylor. Let's take another volunteer. Anybody want to volunteer on what .one does? Any takers? Don't look at the documentation. Marlo, what do you think? What do you think
I'm guessing it's going to be kind of similar to all, but instead of checking if all relate to the Boolean, it's just going to make sure that one of the items in the collection equates to true.
Okay. So do you think that needs to have a Boolean expression in that block of code?
I'm going to guess yes.
Yeah, I think you're right. And so we can pass a block of code to that. And just like .all, do we usually pass a block of code to this? And the answer on that is yes, because we want to know what are we looking for one of? Like, am I looking for one student in the, like, is there one student in the class whose name starts with the letter Q, you know? And this will give us like a yes or no. The other thing to note on these three, because they end in a question mark, these are going to basically return a Boolean of true or false for whether it found, like, did everything in that array match true or false? Did one thing in that array match true or false? So because these are Boolean expressions, these are going to return, or because there's a question mark on here, they're going to return a Boolean response. All right, any takers on .none? What do you think? Let's go to Brian. Thanks for volunteering.
I'll do .none. I was actually at a question if there was a difference between .one and .any.
Ooh, that's a good question. Let's chew on that for a minute. Let's open it up for discussion. What do you think? .one versus .any? Any takers? You're welcome to drop in chat as well if you want. Let's go back to let's go to Blake.
Would .one specify that there is only one?
Yeah, .one is exactly one. .any is like, are any of these, like, do any of these match? And so it's basically one or more, where .one is exactly one. So there's exactly one match on this one. .none is exactly 0 matches And if we're going to look at .any, let's do this. And this would be .any. So .any then is basically going to be one or more. Come on, more matches for .any. Cool. What do we want to fill in for here? Do we need code? Do you think we usually pass a block of code? What do we think for these enumerables? Let's go back to Blake.
So I would say that you do need the block of code.
Yep. So just like all of these, like we're typically going to pass a block of code. And we'll do the same for .any. So we're basically checking here, like, does something match an expression? And that's going to be our Boolean. And so the last line of code in that block is going to be a Boolean of some kind. Now, that doesn't mean there's only one line of code in that block. We could do a bit of processing and then say, okay, now that we've processed a bunch of stuff, that last line is a Boolean expression based on something else. But for all of these, we're pretty much always going to be passing a block of code to these, which is the expression of, do all of these match? Does exactly one match? Do any of them match, or do none of them match? Cool. All right, let's open it up for questions just in general. We've covered a ton of enumerables. So let's just open it up for questions just about any kind of enumerable. Any last burning questions, anything you want to go over here? Let's go to Sammy.
Can you talk a little bit about like what a block of code technically is, and is there different, I guess, parameters that you could say for what a block of code is and what a block of code might not be?
Yeah, that's a good question. So let's clarify what that block of code actually is. When we talk about .each, so let's imagine that we've got an array of all our numbers from 1 to 5. And then in here, I'm going to do array.each do, and then I've got a number, and then somewhere down here, we're going to have an end. Oops. And inside of here, we're going to do some kind of expression like, puts num plus 5 or something like that. This whole bit right here that I've got highlighted is what we call a block of code. And so we're basically writing a couple of lines of Ruby code. It could be just a single expression. It could be multiple lines of code, but this is what we call a block. Now we could also shorten this by using the curly braces like this if we're only doing a single expression. So if we're only doing a single expression, you'll typically see these curly braces. And that basically is just this curly brace is the do and this curly brace is the end. So if you're only doing a single expression, you'll typically see the curly braces used. Me personally, I like seeing the do and the end. I find that that's much more readable. So I tend to do the do and the end, even if I've only got a single line of code in here, because I find that that makes that block of code easier to read. Now, because this is a block of code, and this is a variable for each thing in the array, this is why we call this our block variable, because we've built a block of code that makes num our block variable, which is representing each value in our array. Does that help, Sammy?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thanks for asking. Let's go to Brian for a question.
Are we just opening this up to like general enumerable questions at this point, or do you want to focus on these ones?
Yep.
So I struggled with like conceptually, like with reduce or inject. You have to, put two different items within the block, and I guess I was just hoping to get some clarification on how to use that with like I don't know, like strings and how they kind of fit in.
Okay. So we haven't specifically talked about inject and reduce, but inject is basically going to try to combine everything together based on something. Well, actually, both inject and reduce. we're finding a way of like smushing the data together somehow to come up with a final result. So a good example of that would be like .sum, where you're trying to add numbers together. Inject, you could do something like, I want to multiply the numbers together, where sum is always just going to be addition. And so you might use like inject to say, I want to multiply everything together. Although you can also do that with reduce. So inject and reduce are going to be a little bit similar. Oh, sorry, my apologies. Inject and reduce are actually aliases, so they both do the same thing. So similar to like find and detect, and find all with collect. I always get those mixed up. But similar to how those had aliases, and map was like collect. So it's no, this was select, detect, collect, select. I always get those mixed up and messed up. But inject and reduce are basically the same thing. We're basically figuring out how do we combine our data in some way to reduce it down to like a single value, given some expression or some block of code. But we can talk about that in another class, I think.
Okay, thanks.
Cool, thanks, Brian. Let's go to Corinna.
So a lot of the examples that we've gone through, it's over an array that we're iterating with. Can you use the same enumerables for hashes?
Ooh, that's a good question. The short answer is usually. Dot each will go over each key. And so we could do something where if we had, let's do a hash, and I'm just going to do like A is set to a value of 5 and B is set to a value of 10. If we do a dot each on that hash, we'll typically get both the key and the value out of that as a pair. And so inside this block of code, then we could do something like puts my key of key as a value of value. And so we can actually extract both the key and the value by doing a dot each. Min and max, those can iterate over hashes as well. It's not as typical to enumerate over a hash. I've mostly just used dot each and dot map. But again, map is going to return an array of something. So if I was trying to go through a hash, trying to figure out like I wanted an array of values based on what was in my hash, then I could do that. It's a little less common, but it does depend a little bit on what you're trying to accomplish in the code. But the short answer is yes, you can use hashes in a lot of these enumerables, but the result that you get may be a little confusing. Probably I would say the most typical one is just going to be dot each, where you're saying like for each thing in the hash, I want to like do something. Cool. Let's go. Brian, did you have another question, or is your hand still up from before? Just up from before, thanks. Marla, what do you got for us?
So this might be a slightly random question, but with what you were telling us about the ASCII chart,
The ASCII chart, yep.
ASCII chart, there we go. Is that, so the fact that capital letters have a lower value than lowercase letters, does that mean that it's easier for the computer to read a capital letter? So like when we have the choice between capital and lowercase, should we tend to go capital for any reason?
No, it's a good question. It doesn't make it any easier. This is just how it's represented in the memory of the computer, and these are all stored by binary values, because the computer only understands zeros and ones, and so if we were to turn these numeric values here into binary of zeros and ones, that's just how the computer understands. Like, oh, this 011100001 means the capital C or something. Okay. Where this other series of zeros and ones, that means like lowercase d or something instead. So it's just how it represents in memory, but it doesn't make it necessarily easier for the computer. It's all just 8 bits, where each bit is a 0 or a 1. So every collection of those 8 bits will represent a letter of some kind.
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
Yep. Yeah, thanks for asking, Marla. I thought I saw one other hand raised, but I don't see it now. There it is. JJ, what do you got for us?
That was me, but you already said it, but I simply forgot. But you called the word inside the pipes in the block of code something. I forget what you called that.
Yeah, that's our block variable. Because this is a block of code, whatever we define inside these vertical bars or our pipe character is what we call our block variables. Because these variables get declared based on what we're iterating over, what we're enumerating over, and they only have scope within that block of code. So we can't use key or value after this block of code. Like if why can't I edit this field? There we go. Like I can't use key outside here. Like I can't say print key because key doesn't exist anymore. It only lives up here inside that block. And so anything inside those vertical bars we call a block variable. Cool. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, I'll let you have another 8-minute POM and watch the channel for a Zoom call from Megan. I'll get this video up as soon as I can, and we'll see y'all in the next class. All right. Thanks for hanging out, everybody. See ya.